The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. It was one of those perfect autumn days when the air feels fresh and cool, and everything seems peaceful. The castle grounds were already bustling with activity, even though it was still early. Guards were taking their positions, staff members were going about their duties, and somewhere inside the grand building the royal family was starting their day. Among the guards standing tall and proud was a young soldier named James Mitchell. He was only 24 years old, but standing there in his impressive uniform made him feel like he was living his childhood dream. Ever since he was a little boy watching the changing of the guard ceremony on television, he had wanted to be part of this incredible tradition. His mother still kept the photograph of 5-year-old James wearing a toy soldier uniform, saluting at the TV screen. Now here he was, years later, actually doing it for real. James took his position near the East Terrace with pride. The morning was beautiful and he felt honored to be there. He stood perfectly still, his rifle at his side, his red uniform pressed and perfect. This was what he had trained for. This was what he had dreamed about. Everything seemed absolutely normal. Inside the castle, Princess Charlotte was getting ready for her morning walk. At 7 years old, she was already showing signs of having her own unique personality. She wasn't like other children her age who might be intimidated by the grandeur of palace life. Instead, she seemed to embrace it while staying remarkably down to earth. Her nanny was helping her get ready, making sure her coat was properly buttoned and her shoes were tied. Charlotte had always been fascinated by the guards. While other children might see them as statues or just part of the scenery, she saw them differently. She would often wave at them during her daily walks, and sometimes she would ask her parents questions about them. Where did they live? Did they have families? What did they eat for lunch? Her curious mind always wanted to know more about the people around her. This particular morning, Charlotte was excited about her walk. She had been learning about different types of trees in her lessons, and she wanted to see if she could identify the ones in the castle gardens. Her nanny smiled at her enthusiasm. The young princess had this wonderful way of finding joy in simple things, despite growing up in one of the most famous families in the world. As they stepped outside, the cool air hit their faces. Charlotte took a deep breath and smiled. She loved mornings like this. The castle grounds looked magical, with the early sunlight casting long shadows across the perfectly maintained lawns. Birds were singing in the trees, and there was a peaceful quietness that made everything feel special. They began their walk along the usual path. Charlotte pointed out different things she noticed. A squirrel running up a tree the way the light hit the old stone walls, the sound of footsteps echoing in the courtyard. Her nanny walked beside her, enjoying the princess's observations and comments. It was these simple moments that reminded everyone that despite her royal title, Charlotte was still just a child who found wonder in the world around her. As they approached the East Terrace, Charlotte did what she always did. She looked for the guards to give them her usual cheerful wave. She had learned from her parents that even small gestures of acknowledgement could mean a lot to people. Her mother had once told her that everyone deserves to be seen and appreciated, no matter what job they do. But something was different this morning. As Charlotte's eyes found James Mitchell standing at his post, she noticed something that made her pause. The guard who usually stood so straight and strong seemed different somehow. She couldn't quite put her finger on it at first, but her instincts told her something wasn't right. She slowed her pace, her eyes not leaving the young guard. Her nanny, not noticing anything unusual, continued talking about the plans for the rest of the day. But Charlotte wasn't listening anymore. She was watching. She was observing. And what she was seeing was starting to worry her. James Mitchell's face, which should have been its normal color, looked pale. Even from a distance, Charlotte could see that something was wrong. The guard seemed to be swaying slightly, which was strange because guards were trained to stand perfectly still. She had watched them many times before, always impressed by how motionless they could remain. The princess stopped walking completely now. Her nanny finally noticed and asked if everything was all right, but Charlotte didn't answer. Her full attention was on the guard, who was clearly struggling. In that moment, despite being just 7 years old, she understood that something serious was about to happen. Her heart started beating faster, not from fear but from concern for someone who might need help. None of them knew it yet, but this ordinary morning walk was about to turn into something extraordinary. A moment that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. A moment that would show the world what true compassion looks like. even from someone so young. The peaceful autumn morning at Windsor Castle was about to become anything but ordinary. Charlotte's instincts were right. Something was very wrong with James Mitchell, and it was getting worse by the second. The young guard was fighting a battle that no one could see. He had woken up late that morning after a restless night, and in his rush to get to his post on time, he had skipped breakfast completely. It seemed like a small decision at the time, but now it was catching up with him in the worst possible way. The world around James started to spin. The beautiful castle grounds that had looked so clear and sharp just minutes ago were now becoming blurry. He could feel his heart racing in his chest, and a cold sweat was forming all over his body. Despite the cool morning air, he knew the rules. He knew he was supposed to stand firm no matter what. Guards didn't move. Guards didn't show weakness. But his body wasn't listening to what his mind was telling it. He tried to focus on something, anything, to keep himself steady. He looked at the old stone walls in front of him, trying to use them as an anchor. But even the ancient stones seemed to be moving now. His legs felt like they were made of water instead of muscle and bone. The weight of his uniform, which he normally wore with such pride, now felt like it was crushing him. Charlotte saw it all happening. While the adults around her were going about their business, chatting and walking and not paying much attention, this 7-year-old girl saw what they didn't. She watched as the guard's swaying became more pronounced. She saw his face turn from pale to almost gray, and then, in what seemed like slow motion to her, she saw him start to fall. James Mitchell's knees gave out first. It was like someone had cut the strings on a puppet. One moment he was upright. The next moment he was collapsing toward the hard cobblestone ground. The sound of his body hitting the ancient stones echoed across the courtyard. It was a heavy, terrible sound that made everyone within earshot turn their heads in alarm. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The other guards nearby didn't know what to do. They were trained for many things, but a fellow guard collapsing wasn't something they dealt with every day. Staff members stopped in their tracks, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Some people gasped. Others just stood there trying to process what had happened. But Charlotte didn't freeze. While everyone else was still trying to understand what they had just seen, the young princess was already moving. Her small legs carried her forward before her brain even had time to think about it. It was pure instinct, pure compassion driving her forward. Her nanny called out her name, reaching for her arm, but Charlotte was too quick. By the time the adults started rushing toward the fallen guard, Charlotte was already there. She dropped to her knees beside James Mitchell, her small face full of concern. She had never seen anyone collapse like that before, and it scared her. But being scared didn't stop her from wanting to help. If anything, it made her more determined. James was lying on the cold stones, completely unconscious. His eyes were closed, and his face had lost almost all its color. His impressive uniform was now crumpled and dusty from the fall. His tall bearskin hat had rolled a few feet away. He looked so different from the strong, proud guard who had been standing there just moments before. Now he just looked vulnerable and human. People started gathering around. Other guards were calling for help on their radios. Staff members were running to get assistance. Someone was calling for the medical team. The quiet, peaceful morning had turned into chaos in just seconds. Everyone was talking at once, their voices mixing together into a confused jumble of sound. Charlotte's nanny finally caught up to her and immediately tried to pull her away from the scene. "Your Highness, please," she said urgently, her voice full of worry. "You need to step back. This isn't safe. Let the adults handle this." But Charlotte shook her head firmly. She wasn't being disobedient or difficult. She just knew somehow that leaving wasn't the right thing to do. She looked up at her nanny with those serious blue eyes and said something that made the older woman pause. "He's hurt. We can't just leave him alone." More people were arriving now. Security officers were trying to control the growing crowd. Someone had brought a first aid kit. Another guard was checking James for injuries from the fall. The medical team had been called and was on their way, but it would still take a few minutes for them to arrive. Charlotte watched all of this happening around her. She saw the concern on everyone's faces. She heard the urgent tones in their voices, but she also noticed something else. Despite all the people rushing around, despite all the activity and concern, James was lying there alone. Everyone was doing things around him, but no one was with him. That's when the princess did something that surprised everyone watching. She carefully took off her cardigan, the pretty one her grandmother had given her for her last birthday. It was soft and warm and one of her favorite pieces of clothing. Without hesitating, she gently lifted James's head and placed the folded cardigan underneath it, like a pillow. The gesture was so tender, so thoughtful, that it made several of the people watching feel a lump form in their throats. Here was a 7-year-old princess, someone who could have just walked away and let others handle everything, choosing instead to offer what comfort she could to a stranger who had fallen. But Charlotte wasn't done. As the adults continued to bustle around, some still trying to gently move her away from the scene, she looked up at all of them. Her small voice cut through the noise and chaos like a bell ringing clear and true. "He's not just a guard," she said, her words simple but powerful. "He's a person, and persons need kindness." The crowd fell silent. Those simple words from a child carried more weight than any complicated speech could have. In that moment, everyone there realized something important. They had been so focused on the emergency, on following procedures and protocols, that they had almost forgotten about the human being at the center of it all. It took a 7-year-old princess to remind them of what really mattered. Charlotte's words hung in the air like a gentle but firm reminder of what truly mattered. The adults around her, many of whom had years of experience in royal service, found themselves feeling humbled by the wisdom coming from someone so young. They had been trained in protocols and procedures, in how to handle emergencies efficiently and professionally. But somehow in all their training, they had momentarily forgotten the most basic human response to someone in need. The young princess wasn't thinking about rules or protocols. She wasn't worried about whether her actions were proper for someone of her status. She was simply being human, responding to another human who needed help. And in doing so, she was teaching everyone around her a valuable lesson about compassion. Her nanny made another attempt to guide her away from the scene. "Princess Charlotte, the medical team will be here any moment. They need space to work. Please, let's step back now." Her voice was kind but firm, trying to balance respect for the princess with concern for her safety and the needs of the situation. But Charlotte remained kneeling beside James, her small hand now resting gently near his arm. She looked up at her nanny with a determination that was surprising for someone her age. "I know they need to help him," she said quietly, "but he might be scared. If I was scared and hurt, I wouldn't want to be alone." "Would you?" The nanny opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. How could she argue with that logic? How could she explain that royal protocol mattered more than basic human kindness? She couldn't, because it didn't. Charlotte was absolutely right, and everyone there knew it. One of the senior guards, a man who had served the royal family for over 15 years, knelt down to Charlotte's level. His eyes were kind as he spoke to her. "Your Highness, what you're doing is very thoughtful, but we need to make sure you're safe too. The guard fell quite suddenly and we don't know what's wrong yet." Charlotte nodded, showing she understood his concern. She was young, but she wasn't foolish. "I'll be careful," she promised. "But I need to stay. He helped protect me and my family every day. Now it's my turn to help him, even if it's just by being here." The guard felt his throat tighten with emotion. In all his years of service, he had never seen such pure compassion from someone so young. He glanced at the other adults around them, and he could see his own feelings reflected in their faces. They were all thinking the same thing. This little girl was showing them what real leadership looked like. The crowd around them had grown larger now. Other staff members had heard about the incident and had come to see if they could help. More guards had arrived to provide support to their fallen colleague. Everyone was trying to be useful, but there was also a sense of confusion about what to do. They kept looking at Charlotte, this small figure kneeling beside the unconscious guard, and they didn't know quite how to proceed. Finally, the medical team arrived, moving quickly through the gathered crowd with their equipment. The lead physician, a woman who had worked at the palace for many years, assessed the situation immediately. She saw the fallen guard, the concerned crowd, and the young princess kneeling beside him. She approached quickly but calmly, her professional training taking over. "I need everyone to step back, please," she said in a voice that was both kind and authoritative. "Give us room to work." The crowd immediately began to move away, creating space for the medical team to do their job. But Charlotte didn't move. The physician noticed her and was about to ask someone to take the princess away when she saw the cardigan under James's head and the gentle way Charlotte was positioned beside him. Something about the scene made her pause. Instead of immediately insisting the princess leave, she made a different decision. Your Highness, she said gently, kneeling down beside Charlotte. We need to check on the guardsman and help him. Can you stay right there? Just a little bit to the side while we work? You can watch if you'd like, but we need space to move. Charlotte's face lit up with relief. She hadn't wanted to leave, but she was also worried she might be in the way. I can do that, she said quickly, moving slightly to give the medical team room but staying close enough to keep watch over James. The physician gave her a small smile before turning her attention to her patient. She began checking James's vital signs while her team set up their equipment. Charlotte watched every movement, her young mind trying to understand what was happening and whether the guard would be okay. As the medical team worked, James began to show signs of regaining consciousness. His eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched slightly. The color was starting to return to his face, though he still looked pale and weak. The physician checked his pulse, his blood pressure, and asked him questions he was still too groggy to answer properly. He's coming around, the physician said to her team. Then she added, more to herself than anyone else. Looks like dehydration and low blood sugar. Probably skipped a meal and stood too long in the cool morning air. Charlotte heard this and her eyebrows drew together in concern. She didn't fully understand all the medical terms, but she understood enough. The guard had been so dedicated to his duty that he hadn't taken proper care of himself. That made her both sad and more determined to make sure he was going to be all right. Slowly, James's eyes opened fully. The world came back into focus, though everything still felt fuzzy and strange. He was confused about what had happened and where he was. The last thing he remembered was standing at his post, and now he was lying on the ground surrounded by people. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back down. Easy now, the physician said. You fainted. Just lie still for a moment while we make sure you're okay. James felt embarrassed and confused. Guards weren't supposed to faint. He had let everyone down. But then he turned his head slightly and saw something unexpected. There, sitting beside him with the most concerned expression on her young face, was Princess Charlotte. Their eyes met, and James saw nothing but genuine worry and kindness in her gaze. You're going to be okay, Charlotte said softly, her voice full of certainty. The doctors are helping you now, and you don't have to worry about your job. My father always says that being brave means asking for help when you need it. James felt tears prick at his eyes, though he tried to hold them back. Here he was, a trained soldier, being comforted by a 7-year-old princess who had more grace and compassion in her little finger than he had seen in many adults throughout his life. He wanted to thank her, to tell her how much her kindness meant, but he couldn't find the words. Charlotte seemed to understand anyway. She gave him a small smile. It's okay, she said simply. Friends don't leave friends when they're scared. And in that moment, James Mitchell realized that he had just become friends with a princess. Not because of her title or her status, but because she had seen him as a person who needed help and had responded with pure, uncomplicated kindness. The medical team continued their assessment of James, checking his vital signs and asking him questions to make sure he was fully alert. Charlotte remained exactly where the physician had asked her to stay, watching everything with intense focus. She noticed how carefully the medical staff worked, how they spoke to James in calm, reassuring voices, and how they made sure he was comfortable. The physician pulled out a glucose monitor and checked James's blood sugar levels. The reading confirmed what she had suspected.
Your blood sugar is quite low, she explained to him gently.
When did you last eat? James tried to remember through the foggy feeling in his head. Yesterday evening, I think, he admitted quietly, feeling foolish. I woke up late this morning and didn't have time for breakfast. The physician nodded knowingly. This wasn't the first time she had treated someone who had pushed themselves too hard without proper fuel. That explains it then. Combined with standing for an extended period in the cool air, your body simply ran out of energy. It's not uncommon, but it is preventable. Charlotte listened to this exchange carefully. She understood what had happened now. The guard had been working so hard to do his job well that he had forgotten to take care of himself. It reminded her of something her mother had once told her about how important it is to look after yourself so you can look after others. One of the medical team members offered James a glucose tablet and a bottle of water. He accepted gratefully, his hands still shaking slightly as he brought them to his mouth. The simple act of drinking the water felt amazing, and he realized just how dehydrated he had become. While James was being cared for, Members of the royal household had discreetly informed Prince William and Catherine about what had happened. The news that their daughter was kneeling beside a collapsed guard on the palace grounds had sent them hurrying to the scene, though they tried not to show their alarm. When William and Catherine arrived, they saw a sight that initially worried them but quickly filled them with pride. Their daughter wasn't in any danger. Instead, she was sitting peacefully beside the guard, occasionally asking the medical team quiet questions about what they were doing and whether the guard would be okay. She looked completely calm and focused, mature beyond her 7 years. William and Catherine approached slowly, not wanting to disrupt what was happening. Charlotte noticed them and looked up, her face breaking into a small smile, but she didn't immediately run to them as some children might have done. She stayed where she was, near James, as if she had made a commitment to be there and wouldn't break it. Catherine knelt down beside her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "I'm fine, Mummy," Charlotte replied, "but the guard isn't feeling well. He didn't eat breakfast and he fell down. I'm staying with him so he won't be scared." William joined them, looking at the scene before him. He saw his daughter's cardigan serving as a pillow under the guard's head. He saw the concern in her eyes and the determined set of her small shoulders. He saw the medical team working efficiently while respecting his daughter's desire to stay close. And he saw the young guard, now conscious but still weak, who kept glancing at Charlotte with an expression of disbelief and gratitude. Instead of immediately whisking Charlotte away or scolding her for not listening to her nanny, William did something different. He sat down on the cobblestones beside his daughter, not caring about his formal clothes or what anyone might think. Catherine did the same on Charlotte's other side. "That was very kind of you to stay with him," William said to his daughter, "and very brave." Charlotte looked up at her father thoughtfully. "You and Mummy always say that being royal means serving others, not being served." "I just did what you would do." William and Catherine exchanged a look over their daughter's head. They had taught her those values, hoping they would stick, but seeing her actually live them out, seeing her put compassion above protocol and kindness above comfort, filled them with a pride that words couldn't quite capture. The physician finished her examination and turned to address the royal family. "He's going to be fine, Your Highnesses." It was a combination of dehydration and low blood sugar, nothing more serious. But he should rest and eat something substantial before resuming any duties. Charlotte immediately spoke up. "Can he rest inside? And can someone make sure he gets a proper meal?" Her voice was polite but firm, showing that she expected her question to be taken seriously. William smiled at his daughter's determination. "I think that's an excellent idea. Let's make sure the guardsman is properly taken care of." He turned to one of the staff members. "Please arrange for him to be taken to the medical wing where he can rest comfortably. And have the kitchen prepare a good meal for him." James tried to protest, saying he didn't want to cause any fuss, but he was overruled by everyone present. Charlotte looked at him with such earnest concern that he couldn't help but accept the help being offered. As the medical team prepared to help James to his feet and escort him inside, Charlotte stood up as well. She turned to her parents with a request that surprised them. "Can I go with him? Just to make sure he gets there okay?" Catherine hesitated, thinking about schedules and lessons and the many things Charlotte was supposed to be doing that morning. But then she looked at her daughter's face and saw something that made her change her mind. This wasn't about a child wanting to skip her responsibilities. This was about a young girl who had made a friend in an unexpected moment and wanted to see her commitment through to the end. "All right," Catherine agreed, "but just to the medical wing, and then you need to come back for your lessons." Charlotte's face lit up with a smile. "Thank you, Mummy." The small group made their way slowly across the palace grounds toward the medical wing. James was able to walk now, though he still felt weak and unsteady. The medical team stayed close to him, ready to provide support if needed. And right beside them walked Princess Charlotte, her small presence somehow making the whole situation feel less embarrassing and more human. Other guards watched this unusual procession pass by. They had never seen anything quite like it before. A princess walking alongside one of their own, not as someone superior checking on a servant, but as someone genuinely concerned about a friend. The story would be told and retold in the guardhouse for years to come. When they reached the medical wing, Charlotte watched as James was settled into a comfortable chair. A nurse brought him water and promised that food would arrive shortly. The color was returning to his face now, and he looked much better than he had lying on the cold cobblestones. Before Charlotte left, she approached James one more time. "You'll feel better soon," she told him confidently. "Make sure you eat breakfast every day from now on, okay? And drink lots of water. That's what my mummy always tells me." James, who had faced down various challenges in his military training without shedding a tear, felt his eyes getting watery again. "I promise, Your Highness. And thank you. For everything. I'll never forget your kindness," Charlotte smiled at him. "You don't have to thank me. That's what friends do." And with that simple statement, she turned and took her mother's hand, ready to go back to her regularly scheduled day. As they walked away, Catherine squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "I'm very proud of you, Charlotte. You showed real compassion today. That's more important than any lesson I could teach you in a classroom." Charlotte looked up at her mother and smiled. She didn't fully understand the impact of what she had done, or how the story of this morning would spread throughout the palace and beyond. She just knew that she had seen someone who needed help, and she had helped them. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. The news of what had happened that morning spread through Windsor Castle faster than anyone could have imagined. Staff members who had witnessed the event couldn't help but share what they had seen. Guards told other guards. Kitchen staff heard about it from those who had been asked to prepare a meal for James. Even the groundskeepers who had been working in other parts of the estate soon knew the story of the young princess who had stayed with a fallen guard. What made the story spread so quickly wasn't just the unusual nature of what had happened. It was the way Charlotte had responded. In a world where royal protocol dictated almost every interaction, where there were rules about who could speak to whom and when, and where maintaining proper distance was considered essential, a 7-year-old had simply chosen kindness over all of it. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone of something they had perhaps forgotten. By lunchtime, the story had reached every corner of the palace. The senior staff gathered to discuss the incident, not because anyone had done anything wrong, but because they needed to understand what had happened and how to handle it going forward. Some of the older, more traditional members were initially concerned about protocol being broken. A princess kneeling on the ground beside a guard, staying at the scene when she should have been moved to safety. These things simply weren't done. But others, particularly those who had been present or had spoken to witnesses, saw it differently. They described the scene not as a breach of protocol, but as a powerful demonstration of the values the royal family claimed to represent. Service, compassion, seeing the humanity in everyone regardless of their role. These weren't just nice words to put in speeches. Charlotte had shown they could be lived principles. Prince William found himself in several conversations that afternoon about what had happened. Each time he defended his daughter's actions without hesitation. "She did exactly what Catherine and I have taught her to do," he told one concerned advisor. "She saw someone in need and she responded with kindness. If that breaks protocol, then perhaps we need to think carefully about what our protocols are really serving." Catherine had a similar conversation with some of the senior household staff. One elderly lady who had served the royal family for decades expressed worry about the precedent being set. "With all due respect, Your Royal Highness, if the princess is allowed to break with protocol whenever she feels it's appropriate, what message does that send?" Catherine listened patiently, then responded with gentle firmness. "The message it sends is that compassion and human kindness come first. Always. Yes, we have protocols, and yes, they serve important purposes, but they should never prevent us from being decent human beings." Charlotte understood that instinctively, and I hope she never loses that understanding. Meanwhile, Charlotte herself had returned to her normal routine, seemingly unaware of all the discussion her actions had sparked. She attended her afternoon lessons, practiced her piano, and played with her siblings. When her younger brother Louis asked her about what had happened, she explained it simply. "One of the guards wasn't feeling well, so I stayed with him until the doctors came. That's all." That evening at dinner, the family discussed the day's events more thoroughly. William and Catherine wanted to use the moment as a teaching opportunity. Not to scold Charlotte, but to help her understand the impact of her actions and to reinforce the values she had demonstrated. "You know," William began, "what you did this morning was very special. A lot of people are talking about it." Charlotte looked up from her plate, slightly surprised. "They are? Why?" "I didn't do anything special. The guard needed help." "That's exactly why it's special," Catherine explained. You saw someone who needed help and you didn't think about yourself or worry about what people might say. You just helped. That's real leadership, Charlotte. Charlotte thought about this for a moment, her young face serious. But isn't that just being a good person? You've always taught us to help people. William smiled. Yes, we have. But knowing something and actually doing it, especially when it's difficult or uncomfortable, are two different things. You could have just walked away and let others handle it. Many people would have done that. But you didn't. It didn't feel difficult, Charlotte said honestly. He looked scared, and I thought if I was scared, I would want someone to stay with me. So I stayed. The simplicity of her reasoning was profound. She hadn't been thinking about making a statement or setting an example or living up to royal values. She had simply responded as one human being to another's need. It was that authenticity that made her actions so powerful. Catherine reached over and gently touched her daughter's hand. We're very proud of you, sweetheart. And I want you to know that what you did today, staying with that guard and showing him kindness, that's more important than any rule or protocol. Never forget that people matter more than procedures. Charlotte nodded, taking in her mother's words. Will the guard be okay? Can I visit him again? William and Catherine exchanged a glance. This was an unusual request, but then again, the entire situation was unusual. We'll see how he's recovering, William said. But I think a visit could be arranged. After all, you did tell him friends don't leave friends when they're scared. And friends check on each other afterward, too. Charlotte beamed at this response. She liked the idea of having made a new friend, even if he was much older and was one of the palace guards. To her, friendship wasn't about age or position. It was about connection and caring. Over the next few days, arrangements were quietly made for Charlotte to check on James's recovery. The palace staff, seeing how important this was to the young princess, made sure these visits could happen without too much fuss or attention. They understood that something meaningful had happened that morning, and they wanted to support it rather than shut it down with rigid adherence to protocol. The first visit happened 3 days after the incident. James was back on his feet now, fully recovered and feeling somewhat embarrassed about the whole situation. He was sitting in one of the palace's side rooms when Charlotte arrived with her mother. His immediate instinct was to stand at attention and bow formally, but Catherine gently waved him to remain seated. Please don't stand on ceremony. Charlotte wanted to see how you were feeling. Charlotte walked right up to him with a smile. Are you better now? Did you remember to eat breakfast every day? James couldn't help but smile at her straightforward concern. Yes, Your Highness, I'm much better. And yes, I've been eating breakfast every day. I even set 2 alarms on my phone to make sure I wake up with enough time. Good, Charlotte said, satisfied. I was worried about you. And you don't have to call me Your Highness when we're just talking like friends. Charlotte is fine. James looked startled, then glanced at Catherine to see if this was actually allowed. Catherine just smiled and nodded, giving her approval for this breach of protocol. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot. It meant that the relationship between the princess and the guard could be genuine, rather than just formal. They talked for a little while, with Charlotte asking James questions about being a guard and what he liked about his job. James, in turn, thanked her again for her kindness and told her that he had written a letter to her, which he had been planning to send through proper channels. You wrote me a letter? Charlotte asked, delighted. Can I read it now? James retrieved the letter from his pocket, slightly crumpled but carefully written. Charlotte read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she took in each word. The letter thanked her for her compassion and explained how her simple act of kindness had reminded him why he was proud to serve. He wrote about how easy it was to forget that behind every uniform and every role, there was a real person with feelings and needs. Charlotte's actions had reminded him to see that in others, just as she had seen it in him. When Charlotte finished reading, she looked up at James with shining eyes. This is the nicest letter anyone has ever written to me. Can I keep it? Of course, Your Highness. I mean, Charlotte. It's yours. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte had one more thing to say. I told the kitchen staff that guards need to have proper breaks and food during their shifts. My father said he would make sure there are new rules so this doesn't happen to anyone else. So you actually helped make things better for everyone, even though you were the one who got hurt. James felt overwhelmed by emotion. This little girl had not only shown him compassion in a difficult moment, but had also taken action to help prevent the same thing from happening to his fellow guards. It was more than he could have imagined. As Charlotte left with her mother, James sat back down, the letter she had read still in his hand. He thought about the princess's words from that morning. He's not just a guard, he's a person. Those simple words had started something important, something that went beyond just one incident on one morning. They had reminded everyone at Windsor Castle about what truly mattered, and that was a gift more valuable than anything else Charlotte could have given him. The weeks following the incident brought changes to Windsor Castle that no one had quite expected. True to her word, Charlotte had spoken to her parents about the guards needing proper care, and William had taken her concerns seriously. Meetings were held with the guard commanders and senior staff to review policies about break schedules, nutrition, and overall well-being of the guards who served the royal family. It wasn't that the palace had been negligent before, but sometimes systems and routines become so established that no one thinks to question whether they could be better. It took the fresh perspective of a 7-year-old to spark that questioning. The result was a series of practical changes that made the guards' duties more sustainable and healthy. Proper break rotations were established, ensuring no one stood for dangerously long periods without rest. A nutrition program was developed, with easily accessible healthy snacks and drinks available for guards during their shifts. Medical check-ins became more regular, catching potential problems before they became serious. These changes were implemented quietly and efficiently, but everyone knew where they had originated. They came from a princess who had cared enough to notice when someone was struggling. Through all of this, the friendship between Charlotte and James continued to grow in its own quiet way. It wasn't a friendship that involved constant contact or daily interaction. Both of them had their duties and responsibilities. But there was a genuine connection there, built on a moment of vulnerability and compassion that neither of them would forget. Charlotte made it a point to wave specifically to James whenever she saw him on duty during her walks. He would give her a subtle nod in return, his eyes crinkling with a smile even though his face remained professionally neutral. It was their little ritual, a small acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Sometimes Charlotte would leave drawings for him at the guard station. They were the kind of drawings any 7-year-old might make, pictures of flowers or castles or the palace cats. But each one meant something to James. He kept them all in a special folder in his locker, treasures from an unlikely friend who had taught him so much about kindness. One afternoon, Charlotte's governess mentioned during a lesson that they would be studying nutrition and how the body uses food for energy. Charlotte's eyes lit up immediately. Can we learn specifically about what guards need to eat to stay healthy during long shifts? I want to understand it better. Her governess, touched by this request, adjusted the lesson plan accordingly. They learned about complex carbohydrates for sustained energy, the importance of hydration, how blood sugar affects alertness and physical stability, and what constitutes a balanced diet for someone doing physically demanding work. Charlotte took notes carefully, her young mind absorbing information that she could use to better understand what James had experienced. Armed with this new knowledge, Charlotte asked her mother if she could prepare a care package for James. It was an unusual request, but Catherine, seeing how much this friendship meant to her daughter, agreed. Together, they went to the palace kitchen and put together a thoughtful collection of items. A good quality water bottle that James could use during his shifts, some healthy granola bars made by the palace chef, packets of electrolyte powder, and dried fruits and nuts that would provide quick energy without sugar crashes. Charlotte also included a handwritten note on her best stationery. In her careful, childish handwriting, she had written, "Dear James, I learned about nutrition in my lessons and wanted to share these with you. The water bottle is so you always remember to stay hydrated. The snacks are good for energy. Please take care of yourself because your friends care about you. Your friend, Charlotte." When the package was delivered to James at the guard station, he was initially confused. Receiving a personal package from a member of the royal family was unprecedented. But when he opened it and read Charlotte's note, he had to step away for a moment to compose himself. The thoughtfulness, the genuine care, the fact that she had actually studied nutrition to better understand what had happened to him, it was almost too much. He wrote back immediately, thanking her and promising to use everything in the package. He told her that he had already been following her breakfast advice religiously, and that he felt much better and more alert during his duties. He also mentioned that other guards had noticed the positive changes in the working conditions and wanted to thank her too. though they weren't sure how to express it to a princess. Charlotte's response to this was typical of her practical, kind nature. She asked her father if she could meet briefly with some of the guards to hear directly from them about their work and any suggestions they might have for making things better. William, impressed by his daughter's initiative, arranged an informal meeting. On a sunny Saturday morning, Charlotte met with a small group of guards in one of the palace's less formal rooms. Her parents had offered to be present, but Charlotte asked if she could do it by herself. "They might feel more comfortable talking to just me," she reasoned with wisdom beyond her years. Catherine stayed nearby but out of sight, letting her daughter take the lead. The guards were initially nervous, unsure how to interact with a royal princess in such an informal setting. But Charlotte immediately put them at ease. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chairs. "I'm not here as a princess right now. I'm here as someone who wants to understand your jobs better and make sure you're all okay." One by one, the guards opened up. They talked about the pride they took in their work and how honored they felt to serve. They also mentioned small challenges they faced, nothing major, just little things that could make their long shifts more manageable. Charlotte listened carefully to every word, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand their experiences. James was part of this group, and at one point one of the other guards mentioned him. What happened to James that morning could have happened to any of us. We all push ourselves sometimes, trying to be perfect at our duties. But Charlotte, what you did that day reminded us that it's okay to be human. It's okay to need help sometimes. Charlotte nodded seriously. "My mother says that asking for help is actually braver than pretending everything is fine when it's not. And my father says that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. You can't protect others if you don't protect yourself too." The guards exchanged looks, impressed by this young princess's understanding. She might have been only 7 years old, but she grasped concepts that some adults struggled with. Before the meeting ended, Charlotte had one more thing to share. "I want you all to know that I see you. Not just as guards, but as people. People with families and dreams and feelings. And if you ever need help or if something isn't right, please tell someone. Promise me?" The guards promised, their voices thick with emotion. As they filed out of the room, each one thanked Charlotte, not with stiff formal bows but with genuine gratitude in their eyes. James was the last to leave, and he paused at the door. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "you've changed things here in ways you might not fully understand yet, but you've made us all think differently about our roles and about each other. That's a rare gift." Charlotte smiled at him. "You're my friend, James, and friends look out for each other. Plus, you've taught me things too. You've shown me that people can be really dedicated to their work while still being kind and real. That's important." As the weeks turned into months, the friendship between Charlotte and James became a quiet but constant part of life at Windsor Castle. It wasn't about grand gestures or frequent meetings. It was about mutual respect, genuine care, and the understanding that their unlikely connection had made both of them better people. Charlotte learned from James about dedication, duty, and the pride that comes from serving something larger than yourself. James learned from Charlotte about compassion, authenticity, and the courage it takes to put kindness above protocol. And everyone around them learned from watching their friendship that sometimes the most powerful bonds are formed in the most unexpected moments, and that titles and age differences mean nothing when human connection is real and true. For several weeks, the story of Charlotte and the guard remained a private matter within the walls of Windsor Castle. The staff who had witnessed it treasured the memory, but understood that some moments were too precious to share publicly. The guards spoke of it among themselves with quiet pride. The royal family, while deeply moved by Charlotte's actions, didn't seek to publicize what had happened. It was simply a beautiful moment that had brought positive changes to their household. But beautiful stories have a way of spreading, no matter how privately they begin. During a routine meeting between palace representatives and members of the press who covered royal activities, someone mentioned in passing the recent improvements to guard welfare policies at Windsor Castle. A curious journalist asked what had prompted these changes, and the spokesperson, not thinking it needed to be kept secret, mentioned that young Princess Charlotte had expressed concern for the guards' well-being after witnessing an incident. The journalist's interest was immediately piqued. What kind of incident? How had a 7-year-old princess influenced palace policy? Could they learn more about what had happened? The palace, realizing the story was going to come out one way or another, decided to share the basic facts rather than let speculation run wild. Within days, newspapers across Britain and around the world were running stories about Princess Charlotte's compassionate response to a guard's collapse. The details that emerged painted a picture that captured people's hearts. A young princess kneeling beside a fallen guard, refusing to leave his side, using her own cardigan as a pillow, and declaring that he was not just a guard but a person who deserved kindness. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with discussion about Charlotte's actions. People shared the story again and again, often adding their own commentary about what it meant and why it mattered. The phrase, "He's not just a guard, he's a person," became something of a viral moment, quoted and requoted across various platforms. What struck people most wasn't just that Charlotte had been kind. Children are often naturally kind. What moved them was the way she had put her compassion into action, despite any potential barriers of protocol or status. She hadn't asked permission or waited for someone to tell her what to do. She had simply seen someone in need and responded with immediate, practical kindness. Parents around the country began using Charlotte's story to teach their own children about empathy and action. "See," they would say, "even a princess knows that being kind is more important than worrying about rules or what other people think." Teachers incorporated the story into lessons about compassion and courage. Charlotte became an example of how young people could make a real difference through simple acts of humanity. The royal family received thousands of letters, emails, and messages through social media. Many were addressed directly to Charlotte, though she was still too young to handle such correspondence herself. People wrote to thank her for reminding them of what truly mattered. Parents of children with special needs wrote to say that Charlotte's statement about seeing people as people, not just their roles, had given them new hope for their children's acceptance in the world. Veterans and active military members wrote to express their gratitude that someone had acknowledged the human being behind the uniform. One letter came from a retired school teacher who wrote, "I have taught for 40 years, always trying to instill compassion in my students. I have used countless stories and examples, but Princess Charlotte's simple action and her words have done more to spark conversations about kindness in my community than anything I ever managed. She has reminded us all that compassion isn't complicated. It's simply seeing another person's need and responding with love." A group of nurses wrote collectively to say that Charlotte's words resonated deeply with their experience. "Every day we care for patients who are reduced to their conditions in others' eyes. We're just the nurses. They're just the heart patient or the surgery in room 3. Princess Charlotte reminded everyone that we're all people first, roles second. Thank you." The story even reached international audiences. In countries around the world, people who had never paid much attention to the British royal family found themselves moved by this story of a young princess who chose kindness. Some saw it as evidence that the younger generation of royals understood their role differently. Others simply saw it as a universal human story that transcended nationality or culture. Commentary pieces appeared in major newspapers. Some analyzed what Charlotte's actions said about modern monarchy and its evolution. Others focused on what her behavior suggested about how she was being raised and the values being instilled in the young royals. A few cynical voices suggested the whole thing was a publicity stunt, but these were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming majority, who recognized genuine compassion when they saw it. Child development experts weighed in, noting that Charlotte's response showed sophisticated emotional intelligence for her age. The ability to recognize another person's distress, to imagine how they might feel, and to take concrete action to help were all markers of healthy emotional development. But beyond that, her insistence on staying despite being asked to leave showed moral courage. The willingness to stand by her convictions even when it might be easier to comply. Schools across Britain began implementing new programs inspired by Charlotte's example. Kindness Champions programs encourage students to look for opportunities to help others in practical ways. Discussion groups talked about the difference between theoretical kindness and actual action. Students were challenged to think about times when they might have walked away from a situation where they could have helped, and what they might do differently in the future. Youth organizations picked up the theme as well. Scout troops and youth clubs created activities centered around recognizing when people needed help and finding practical ways to provide it. Charlotte's cardigan as pillow became a symbol of creative compassion, doing what you can with what you have, rather than waiting until you have perfect resources or conditions. The impact even reached into workplaces and corporate environments. Human resources departments began using Charlotte's story in training about workplace culture and supporting colleagues. The idea that people weren't just their job titles but whole human beings with needs and feelings seemed obvious when stated plainly. But Charlotte's story made people think about how often that principle got forgotten in daily work life. Mental health advocates particularly embraced Charlotte's message. In a world where people often suffered in silence, afraid to show weakness or ask for help, the story of a guard who collapsed because he had pushed himself too hard resonated deeply. Charlotte's compassionate response and her later words about friends not leaving friends when they're scared became a touchstone for discussions about breaking down stigma around asking for help. The changes Charlotte had sparked within Windsor Castle also inspired other institutions to examine their own practices. Other royal households in different countries looked at their protocols around staff welfare. Military organizations reviewed their policies about soldier care and mental health support. Even private companies began questioning whether their efficiency-focused cultures were overlooking the basic human needs of their employees. Back at Windsor Castle, the family watched all of this unfold with mixed feelings. They were proud of Charlotte, certainly, and moved by how her simple act of kindness had touched so many people. But they also worried about the attention it brought to their daughter, and whether it would change her or make her self-conscious about future actions. Catherine spoke with Charlotte about all the attention, wanting to make sure she understood what was happening, without feeling overwhelmed by it. "A lot of people are talking about what you did," she explained gently. "They're saying lovely things about your kindness." Charlotte looked thoughtful. "But I didn't do it so people would talk about it. I did it because James needed help." "I know, sweetheart," Catherine assured her. "And that's exactly why it means so much to people. They can tell you did it from your heart, not for attention. But now that people know about it, your actions are inspiring others to be kind too. That's a wonderful thing, even if it feels a bit overwhelming." "Does that mean I always have to do special things now?" Charlotte asked with a hint of worry. "What if I just want to be normal sometimes?" William, who had been listening, knelt down to his daughter's level. "You can always be yourself, Charlotte. What you did that day wasn't about being special or performing for others. It was about being human and caring. You can do that whether anyone is watching or not. And most of the time, no one will be watching, and that's perfectly fine." Charlotte seemed relieved by this answer. She didn't want to become someone who did kind things only when people were looking, or only when it would be noticed and praised. She wanted to just be herself, someone who helped when help was needed because that felt like the right thing to do. The story of Princess Charlotte and the guard eventually faded from the headlines, as all stories eventually do. New events and news took their place in public attention. But the impact of that autumn morning at Windsor Castle continued to ripple outward in ways both visible and invisible. Years passed after that memorable autumn morning at Windsor Castle, but the incident never truly faded from memory. For those who had been present, it remained a defining moment, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. And for Charlotte herself, though she moved on to new experiences and continued growing up in the public eye, the day she stayed with James would always hold a special place in her heart. The friendship between Charlotte and James evolved as time went on, as all friendships do. Charlotte grew older, her life filling with more responsibilities and activities befitting a young princess. James continued his service with the royal household, eventually rising through the ranks to take on more senior roles. They couldn't maintain the same kind of connection they had in those first weeks and months after the incident, but there remained between them a bond that didn't require constant contact to stay strong. Every year on the anniversary of that day, James would receive a card from Charlotte. As she got older, her messages became more sophisticated, but they always contained the same core sentiment: a thank you for what he had taught her about dedication and duty, and a reminder that she hoped he was taking care of himself. James treasured these cards, keeping them in a special box in his home. Each one was a reminder of the day a 7-year-old princess had shown him more compassion than he had ever expected to receive. The changes that Charlotte's concern had sparked within the palace became permanent fixtures. The improved break schedules, the attention to nutrition and hydration, the regular wellness checks for guards and staff, all of these remained in place and were even enhanced over time. New guards who joined the royal household learned about these policies during their training, though many of them didn't know the origin story behind the rules. They simply saw them as evidence that the royal family cared about the well-being of those who served them. But some of the longer-serving guards made sure the story was passed down. In quiet moments in the guardhouse over cups of tea during breaks, veteran guards would tell newer recruits about the day Princess Charlotte refused to leave a fallen guard's side. "It changed things here," they would say. "Made everyone remember that we're not just uniforms and traditions. We're people, and we matter as people." The story became part of the unofficial history of Windsor Castle, the kind of tale that wasn't in any official records, but was perhaps more important because of it. It was told during training sessions as an example of the values the household embodied. It was referenced during policy discussions when decisions needed to be made about staff welfare. It became a touchstone, a reminder of what the royal family at its best could represent. Charlotte's statement, "He's not just a guard, he's a person," was never forgotten. Years later, it would still be quoted in discussions about how society views people in service roles. It appeared in books about empathy and social consciousness. It was used in training programs for organizations ranging from hospitals to schools to corporations. The simple truth that a 7-year-old had articulated so clearly continued to resonate because it addressed something fundamental that people too often forgot. As Charlotte entered her teenage years, she occasionally faced questions from journalists about that day. She always answered thoughtfully, neither dismissing the incident as trivial nor claiming too much credit for it. "I just did what anyone should do," she would say. "Someone needed help and I tried to help. I was lucky to be in a position where I could make sure he got the care he needed." What she rarely mentioned publicly, but what those close to her knew, was how much that experience had shaped her understanding of her role as a member of the royal family. It had taught her that real leadership wasn't about authority or status. It was about seeing people's needs and responding to them. It was about using whatever privilege or position you had to make things better for others. These lessons guided her as she took on more royal duties and began to develop her own areas of focus for her future work. On James's 30th birthday, Charlotte sent him a gift that deeply moved him. It was a framed photograph that somehow the palace photographers had captured on that autumn morning. The image showed Charlotte kneeling beside the fallen guard, her small hand near his arm, her face full of concern. Underneath, Charlotte had written in her own hand, "To James, who taught me that asking for help is brave and that real strength includes knowing your limits. Thank you for being part of the day that taught me what truly matters. With friendship and gratitude, Charlotte." James hung the photograph in his home where he saw it every day. It reminded him not just of his own moment of vulnerability, but of the extraordinary kindness he had received in that vulnerable moment. It reminded him to extend that same compassion to others. And it reminded him that sometimes the most important teachers come in unexpected forms, like a 7-year-old princess who understood humanity better than many adults ever would. The water bottle Charlotte had given James all those years ago was still in use, though it had been replaced several times over. Each time the old one wore out, James would buy an exact replacement, maintaining what had become a personal tradition. Every morning when he filled it before heading to work, he remembered Charlotte's note about staying hydrated and her genuine concern for his well-being. Such a simple thing, but it represented something profound about how much impact caring could have. The incident also had lasting effects on how the media covered the young royals. Many journalists who wrote about Charlotte in later years would reference that morning as evidence of her character. She became known as the princess with a compassionate heart, someone who genuinely cared about people regardless of their station. This reputation would serve her well as she grew older and took on more public responsibilities, as people felt they could trust her genuine concern for others. Educational institutions continued to use Charlotte's story years after it happened. Schools teaching lessons on empathy, kindness, and social responsibility found it to be a powerful real-world example that students could understand and relate to. The story had everything: a protagonist students could admire, a clear moral lesson that wasn't preachy, and real-world impact that showed how one person's actions could create positive change. Youth groups and service organizations found inspiration in how Charlotte had translated her values into immediate action. She hadn't just felt bad for the guard or thought kind thoughts about him. She had done something concrete, something practical, something that actually helped. This became a model for young people learning about active compassion versus passive sympathy. Mental health organizations, particularly, appreciated how the story opened discussions about asking for help and supporting others through difficulties. James's experience of pushing himself too hard and collapsing resonated with many people's struggles with feeling they had to be strong all the time. Charlotte's compassionate response and her later advocacy for better care policies showed how communities could support people through challenging moments rather than judging them for having difficulties. As Charlotte approached adulthood, she sometimes reflected privately on that morning and how much it had affected her life's path. She hadn't known at the time that her instinctive compassion would inspire so many people or lead to meaningful changes. She had just seen someone who needed help and had tried to provide it. But the response to her actions had taught her something important about leadership and influence. Sometimes the most powerful way to create change wasn't through grand speeches or elaborate programs, but through simple, genuine human connection and caring. James, too, carried the lessons of that day throughout his life. He had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that accepting help was sometimes necessary, and that taking care of himself wasn't selfish but essential. He had also learned about the power of unexpected friendship and how connections could form across differences in age and status when genuine humanity was involved. These lessons influenced not just his work, but his entire approach to life and relationships. The medical wing at Windsor Castle, where James had been taken that day, eventually had a small plaque installed that few visitors ever noticed. It didn't reference the specific incident with Charlotte and James, but it quoted the principle that had emerged from it. Every person matters. Every person deserves care, dignity, and kindness. This simple statement guided the approach of everyone who worked in that facility, a quiet but constant reminder of values worth upholding. Windsor Castle saw many historic moments over its centuries of existence. Kings and queens had lived there, important treaties had been signed within its walls, and countless significant events had unfolded on its grounds. But for many of those who worked there during Charlotte's childhood, no event was more meaningful than the day a young princess knelt beside a fallen guard and reminded everyone what true royalty looked like. It wasn't about crowns or titles or ceremony. It was about seeing the humanity in every person. It was about choosing compassion over protocol. It was about acting on your values even when it might be uncomfortable or unconventional. These were the qualities that made someone truly royal in the deepest sense of the word, and Charlotte had demonstrated them perfectly on that autumn morning.